Welcome to Buckets. This is Action Network's WNBA betting podcast. I'm your host, Maria Marino, and I have a special guest on this episode, Albert Wynn, aka Analytics Capper, making his debut. Albert, how are we feeling?
I feel great. I'm honored to be in your presence, and just from our interactions, we both love the WNBA, so it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you don't know Albert, he is a regular over on the Buckets NBA side. Happy to have him breaking down the W this time around, especially for a pretty spicy slate here on Friday, September 13th. We have 5 games on Ion. We're just going to basically run through one at a time as we like to do. Preview, we'll get Albert's thoughts. I'll give a couple of my leans as well. But let's get right into it. So, first game that I want to discuss is a rematch from, I guess it'll be like 48 hours prior, and that is the Aces at Fever, 7:30 p.m. Eastern tip on Friday. Now, the Aces opened as a 4.5 point favorite. I'm seeing them more like 5.5, 6 point favorites now. And yeah, I'll just say that this is definitely the definition of a revenge spot for Indiana. They lost on Wednesday 86-75. I guess I'm just wondering, do they have it in them? Are they mature enough to, actually improve? And moreover, is Christy Sides as a coach, Albert, going to be able to not only make adjustments, but execute them? So I'll just get your general thoughts to start.
Yeah, that latter question is a lot deeper, and that's probably gonna take more than 30 minutes, to be honest with you. But everybody knows, right? The Fever have played so much better since the Olympic break, right? Especially not only Caitlin Clark, but the rest of the team. They kind of have figured out what their roles are, not only in their half court, but also in their semi fast break offense. So it's been really cool to watch. As a bettor, it's been rough for me just because when they had that winning streak, I was actually fading them because I was like, everybody's on Caitlin Clark, everybody's on the Fever. I think there's a lot of value on the other side. With that being said, the Fever have not covered now in 4 straight games. And in this head to head matchup with the Aces are 10-0. 10-0. They've won 10 straight games against the Indiana Fever. They dominate this team. And for some reason, the line is moving towards the Fever, right? If you bet the WNBA or any sport, that is a big tell that the bookmakers expect a very competitive game. But I'm not going to be on a side on this one, Maria. I'm not going to be on a total. Caitlin Clark is coming off an awful shooting performance. She was 1 for 10 from three, I think 6 for 22 overall. I know everyone's going to expect a bounce back, if you will. Maria mentioned it, a revenge spot. But I think they're going to continue to blitz her, and she's going to adjust. I think she's an amazing player, especially in game adjustments. And I think I like the over 8.5 assists for Caitlin Clark in this game.
Over 8.5 assists. Okay, so in the last game, pulling up the box score now, she had 6 assists. Okay, so I feel like that's doable. And also, you have to consider too that apart from Kelsey Mitchell, her teammates also struggled from the field. Aaliyah Boston had gotten into foul trouble. She was only 3 of 10 from the floor. Lexi Hall only took 5 shots. Like, I could see there being some more opportunity for Caitlin to convert some of those potential assists into actual assists. And just for the hell of it, I did look up her scoring prop. Now, I hear you. I am definitely hesitant to bet this just because, to your point, I think the biggest issue for the Fever the other night was they really struggled to handle the Aces' physicality. And Caitlin in particular, which is kind of how she was more earlier in the season. I do think she can adjust a little bit. She's smart, but her points line is at 21.5. So she scored 16 the other night. I'm like, what we keep forgetting, we see Kelsey Mitchell, right? Averaging basically like 25 points since the Olympic break. Caitlin, before last game, I think she had like 5 straight where she had scored like 22, 23 points. So she's more than capable, but I totally understand being a little bit hesitant there with the scoring. Something else I wanted to run by you, actually. I'm workshopping a little bit here. That's what we do here
Let's
on the
do it.
pod. So the other night I actually had bet um Nalissa Smith over 15 and a half points and rebounds. And part of the reasoning was she's kind of dominated this matchup head to head, which is a little surprising, considering she's going up against Asia Wilson. She ended up with 15 even, so I missed by the hook, but she missed 3 free throws, which is kind of to be expected. Maybe missed out on a couple rebound opportunities, and she was the only Fever player with a positive plus minus the other day.
Mm.
So I'm wondering if Coach Sides, rather than, she kind of bailed on Smith in the first half, if you recall, like pulled her for a chunk of the game. I wonder if Sides will commit and ride with her usual rotation, because it was a little odd seeing Christy Wallace out there, for instance, for the first time in, like, I don't know, months. So that's another adjustment that I'm looking for from Sides, to kind of commit to her rotation. And so I'm thinking about running it back with Smith, thinking that she can do it. But any thoughts?
No, I think that's a really smart look. There's one rule that I have when it comes to points props or points rebounds prop. I'm gonna have to like the total over for the game as well, right? So they just played, it was 86-75. Fever only had 75 points and the total was 180 and it flew under. It was a really it wasn't even close basically. So if we expect this to be an over type game where the pace is fast, then yes, I love that look a lot. I think a lot of these player props, Maria, I think we can find value live, right? Because you're going to see how the defense is going to guard, those players in the first quarter. For example, Caitlin Clark. If they're going to blitz Caitlin Clark, then you should definitely focus on assists. But if they're going to let her take the pick and, step back for threes, then yeah, she's going to eat them alive. So it's really going to depend how they cover her in that first quarter. People forget, like, the Fever were outplaying, like, big time outplaying the Aces in that first quarter, right? They were blowing them out, and then they just couldn't sustain it. And I mean, Asia Wilson is Asia Wilson, so um, yeah, I like the look. That's my ultimate thing. But
Interesting.
I think the best way to do it would be live.
Okay, well, I appreciate the perspective. And again, whenever we have like new guests on the show, I'm always interested to get an education, basically, and like hear your like general strategies. And to that end, just since you mentioned Asia, she had 27 the other night. Seeing her points prop at 27 and a half, I'm not touching it, because on one hand, I think another adjustment the Fever need to make is to not let her have, shooting practice from the elbow, because
Yep.
she just had so many wide open
Yep.
mid-range jumpers. But I'm also not going to fade Asia Wilson. All right. So I think we've pretty much hit a lot of different angles in this game. Love it. Let's keep it moving. And the next game I want to talk about, Mystics at Dream. So I'm seeing the Dream favored by 1.5. You might be able to find some twos out there if you like the other side. This is an interesting one, because this is the most, impact as far as the playoff race is concerned. Atlanta and Washington have the same record. They're each a game back of Chicago for that final playoff spot. The other night, I mistakenly thought that the Chicago Sky would have some fight left in them. I was thoroughly disappointed with their effort against the Mystics. The Mystics absolutely blew them out on the road. And the Mystics, as you probably are aware, Albert, they're the best team in the W against the spread, 24-11-1. They've won 8 of their last 9 ATS. They've been pretty good, though. How are you feeling about this game?
I was actually on the other side, not to
Okay.
bring you down, but I love the Mystics the other night. I'm fading that, right? Even though they're the best ATS team in the league, like by far, right? I think it's a great spot to fade. I mean, they just won by 30 plus points. The Dream are a solid team. I think that the issue with the Dream is they want to keep the scoring. In my opinion, they should try to keep it lower. So if it's going to be a lower scoring game, I like their chances a lot more. I know this line has moved a ton, but I still like the home team here. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of these home away splits, like how we see in the NBA, and I think the Atlanta Dream have a pretty good, home court advantage. From an ATS standpoint, they don't do well, but I think from an outright standpoint, they're fine. And I think this is a good bounce back spot for them as well. So it's like a combination, right? It's Mystics coming off a blowout win. It's Atlanta coming off a really disappointing loss where they were, I think, 5 point underdogs and they ended up losing by double digits. So it's a great spot to back Atlanta.
All right. See, I'm really glad that I'm talking this out with you because, part of me wanted to maybe mess around with Mystics money line. I think I'm laying off that, especially after not only consulting with you, but our friend of the show, Andrew O'Connor Watts, has been all over Washington in the first half this season. And
Mm.
so I did a little quick consultation with him because Washington continues to be a great first half team, but the Atlanta Dream are the opposite. They're not good in the first half. They are great in the second half. So to put some numbers behind that, apparently Atlanta is 3-15 in the first half at home. But like I said, so minus 10.8 in the first half point differential, plus 0.8 in the second half. And again, this is a little bit just the opposite, kind of the opposite of how Washington is. So I think if anything, I'm leaning Washington first half, but because they're worse in the second half, I do actually approve, not that you were seeking my approval, of your Dream bet against the spread in the full game.
Yeah, I
Anything
mean,
else?
I like that look a lot, right? Because you're splitting up first and second half, and you're kind of just extrapolating it for the full game, which makes sense. I think just from like a very general principle, the Mystics are on fire, so it's hard to, continue to back them because the books are gonna adjust. At the same time, we know the Atlanta Dream do really well after a loss, especially an ATS loss. So hopefully, this we talk about a revenge spot for Indiana fever, but this is a nice bounce back spot for the Dream. I think they're 6-0 ATS when they lose, the previous game against the spread. So hopefully that reigns true in this one.
Yeah, definitely. And the one other idea you could do here, which I just peeped before we came on, if you wanted to do a double result, Washington first half, Atlanta second half, I saw that around plus 550. So
Oh, nice.
a little bit tempting there. All right, let's keep it moving. The next game, we have the Sky visiting Minnesota. I'm seeing the Lynx now favored by 12 and a half or so. Another 7:30 p.m. Eastern tip. So as I mentioned, the Chicago Sky, they let me down the other day. The Sky is literally falling, lost by 31 to the aforementioned Mystics. Now, the last time these teams met, Minnesota only won by 5, but Angel Reese in that game, 17 points, 19 rebounds. And as we know, she is out for the season. Another interesting note here, Albert, double-digit underdogs have been quite profitable this season. By my count, 37 and 18 ATS. That's going into Thursday. We're recording this prior to the Dallas, New York game. But I just feel like I cannot touch the Sky. Even though Minnesota is 2-3 ATS in their last 5. What say you?
Yeah, I like Minnesota. If I were to choose a side, I would like Minnesota here, but I'm not going to touch it because you're right. Like the double digit, spread it's a lot of points, right? And you can always get backdoored, especially late in the fourth. But I do think Chicago has basically given up on the season. It's a combination of them just not playing well at all, combination of Angel Reese getting season-ending surgery, but I also love Minnesota as a team. They remind me as the NBA comparison to the Celtics because when they're making their threes, they're close to unbeatable in my opinion. I think if we want to talk about like futures in the WNBA, I would look past Liberty. I would look past the Aces. I like Minnesota just because they can get hot for, a month. I think they become really, really hard to beat. So I like in this game particularly, I like the Minnesota to be team total over 84.5. They haven't hit this now against Chicago in 2 games, right? But those 2 games had Angel Reese, so the pace was a lot slower. Angel Reese was, dominating the inside glass with rebounding. But I think if they can get out and run and shoot a ton of threes, I think the 87, the 90 number might even be attainable. So I like the team total over for Minnesota in this game.
I agree with this. I mean, look, if Minnesota is playing their game, which there's really no reason why they shouldn't be dictating, the pace of play and just really being able to play their style against a much weaker and, banged up Chicago team. They should be able to score here. And I I really don't have much else to say other than I agree that the Lynx are a really scary prospect come playoff time because I just think they're very fundamentally sound, right? They're good on offense, they're good on defense, like they're fairly consistent. Nafisa Collier is as consistent as they come. And I have been a believer in the Liberty pretty much this year, but I think the biggest threat to them for sure is Minnesota. At least that's how I look at it. I know Vegas obviously has a super high ceiling and they have the best player in the league, but they've also they've just been so up and down. So I'm in agreement with you there.
Yeah, I mean, just from a percentages standpoint, right? They're the best 3-point shooting team in the league, I think at 38.5%, which is 5 or 6 percentage points above average, which is crazy if you think about it. And then from an attempt standpoint, I think they're only fifth or sixth. So if they can take 3 or 4 more threes per half, I think they become, just from a mathematical standpoint, a clear cut favorite for the title.
Okay, very nice. Always nice to sprinkle in some future thoughts here on the pod. So, just to recap, liking the Lynx team total over, I think you said it was 84.5. But let's move on. We still have 2 more games to discuss. Being nice and efficient here. So, let's get to the Storm at the Wings. And this is another 7:30 p.m. Eastern start. I saw the Storm were favored by 8.5. Now I'm seeing 7, and I find that really interesting. I'm just gonna go out and say like I'm leaning toward the Storm here, but let's talk it out as we do. So Seattle 3-1 straight up and against the spread in their last 4. Did not cover their last game Wednesday at LA. Dallas, we know, out of the playoffs, right? They have dropped 5 in a row straight up and against the spread. This is going into Thursday. So again, we don't know the result as of this recording as they're, playing New York. I expect New York to at least win that game. But again, this is the second night of a back-to-back. So I do think this spot sort of favors Seattle. And I just think about how, like, part of why I liked Chicago the other night is because they looked so good against Dallas. And I come to realize that that means absolutely nothing because Dallas is just so bad
Mm-hmm.
defensively. And here's an actually a little theme this game and the next game I'm going to throw at you. So in this instance, Seattle has won and covered all 3 meetings this season. And so I always think there's a little bit of push and pull when you're like, okay, do we kind of expect the same script or do we expect like, okay, are they really going to win and cover all 4 meetings? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough because the Wings, arguably the worst, if not one of the worst teams in the league, right? Let's just be honest
Sure.
about it. I think they're only 6-24 against their spread. 6-24 against the spread in the last 30 games. Just think about that. Like, they are
Crazy.
performing way under expectations. And I mean, if you watch a Wings game, you can tell from their body language, if they're not making those ridiculous long 2-pointers, like they're not even trying on defense, right? They're giving up layups, they're giving up wide open threes. So it's hard to really, back a team like this or even find a betting angle on a team like this. But I think for me, because you mentioned it, it's the most important thing in my opinion. Even though they're at home, it is a second night of a back to back. It is a Friday night as well. I like the team total under here for Dallas. there's not the there's not the first half team total yet. There's the full game, which is 81 and a half. You can play that. I like the first half look a lot more just because I think they're going to start out slow against a Seattle team that, didn't do well in the first half against LA their last time out. So I think Seattle is going to definitely, try to make a statement that first half. And I think they're going to do that defensively to keep Dallas's offense down. So I like the team total under no matter which way you splice it, whether it's the full game or the first half.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I mean, I could see them definitely coming out sluggish, and Seattle's a pretty stingy defense as well, and they're particularly good at like deflecting and getting steals, and I could see that kind of frustrating Dallas a little bit. And just to chime in, I'm not decided on this yet, but one prop I am considering. Just looking at the last three matchups, I feel like the most consistent Seattle player has been Nneka Ogwumike, and her
Mm-hmm.
points prop is at 15 and a half. She seems to like this matchup. She's hit this in 9 of 10, her last 10 matchups against Dallas. So just definitely something that I'm interested in. Like the bigs on Dallas are very kind of traditional bigs, right? They're on the low block a lot. They have a lot of size. And Nneka, I think she's just more athletic and can,
Yeah.
she can move pretty well against them. So I do like the matchup for Nneka. All right. I think we can move on to our last game. What do you think?
Let's do it.
Okay, we are like I said, we're being very efficient here. Last one. The Sun visiting the Mercury, and this is a late one for if you're on the East Coast anyway, 10 o'clock. And the Sun favored by 4.5 here. You might be able to find a couple of variations there. And this is what I was saying, kind of similar to the last game. We're talking about Seattle, Dallas. In this matchup, same type of situation, in the sense that the Sun they have won and covered all three meetings against Phoenix this season, two of them being blowouts, and they were all prior to the Marina Mabrey trade. So you would think that the Sun would be better with Mabrey, but the Mercury have a lot of talent, and I do feel like this might be a situation where you're like, really, are they really not going to get one, right? Are they really not going to get one against the Sun? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, this is definitely a situational spot, if you will. You mentioned it, right? Connecticut have covered the last three games, and they've covered it actually really easily. They won the first game by 23, second game by 11, and then third game by 27, right? So these are blowout victories. And this line opened up at 6.5, maybe 6 in some places, and it's moved the other way. Now it's down to 5, 4.5. So I think that's very, very telling from the books that they expect not only a competitive game, but I think that line is telling me that they expect Phoenix to actually win outright, to be honest. So if you like Phoenix, which I do, you could be on the spread and definitely sprinkle a little bit on a money line. I would say, I mean, you and I had, a side chat, offline before this. I don't like Phoenix as a team, right? In general, just because I think they're more big names right now than substance, right? You have Griner, Tarazi, like all these legends, if you will, but they're just not a good team. But this is a great spot for them at home, late at night, right, to get a really nice potential victory. And another rule that I have when it comes to betting is I don't like overs or favorites in the last game of the night. Like whether it's a 3 game slate, a 20 game slate, whatever the case may be, I think everybody is chasing for that last win, right? To try to, you know, get some momentum into the next day. So they want points and they want favorites. So I usually either don't touch it or I'm usually on the other side. And in this case, I do like Phoenix to cover at home and potentially get the win as well.
Wow, that's so interesting. Like I never would have even thought of that. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? You want to put your head on the pillow, feeling good. So in regard to your pick, I mean, I do agree with the spot here benefiting Phoenix. Obviously, they're at home. The Sun and are typically an East Coast team. The Mercury, they're in their time zone. And I think I'm looking at the calendar right. I had to double check. I'm pretty sure that Phoenix hasn't played since Saturday, which would mean like 5 full days rest. They
Yep.
have lost 5 of their last 6 straight up and against the spread, but this could be sort of the perfect opportunity to get right. And one other note, just because I did happen to notice that the under is 4-0 in the last 4 Sun games. I saw this total at 158.5. It's now dipped just a point to 157.5, so not too bad. Just another thing to consider there. Any other thoughts?
No, you're right. I'm looking at that trend as well. I see a ton of unders for Sun games. Even their head-to-head, when the Sun visit Phoenix, the under has hit 10 of 12 games. So that's pretty telling. It is a late night game as well. But this is a potential spot for Phoenix to go on a run because I think they play Chicago right after and then Los Angeles right after. So if they get this win, they could, win 3 or 4 in a row, which is a lot of momentum this late in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I look at the standings here, the Phoenix Mercury are 7th. So they're probably more than likely going to remain in that 7th spot. They're only, what, 2 or a game and a half behind Indiana. So there is a chance that they could move up, and that might be enough motivation for them to take advantage of their remaining schedule and really try to push and like you said, get some momentum going into the playoffs. Wow. I mean, it's been, Albert, like 26, 27 minutes of bliss. We've gone through five. We've gone through 5 WNBA matchups. Is there anything else on your mind? Any WNBA other hot takes you want to get off your chest before we say goodbye?
Oh, hot takes. Wow, in the last couple seconds. No, I think I think you and I are in agreement with this. The WNBA is getting more popular every single day, and I love it
Yeah.
because the exposure that they're getting is they're allowing people to realize how entertaining the product is. Maybe it's not as, refined or as clean as the NBA in terms of like execution in the half court or 3-point shooting, whatever the case may be, but it's always entertaining and the product is always cool to watch. So that's awesome for me to see the W continue to grow.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just the fact that we are getting lines available quicker and we're having
Mm.
more markets available to bet on, it's just adding to the overall like allure of the league. And I think that's also contributing to, more people actually paying attention and watching it. It's funny. Sometimes I actually think, Albert, that because the season is so much shorter for the W with 40 games, um, sometimes I actually think that on a game to game basis, the play is even more, I don't know if crisp is the word, or even just more intense, more maybe even more entertaining, because it
Oh,
really
it's
feels
definitely more intense. It's definitely
like
more
every
intense than
game
the NBA.
it's more, every game matters more, like literally.
Yeah.
Like we talked about, for instance, the Mystics and Dream. I mean, every single game pretty much from here on out, and even prior to this, is a playoff game, right? It is a playoff game for them because they need it to get in. And yeah, I just kind of enjoy the, sometimes less is more. Like I just kind of
Yeah.
enjoy that feeling of like every game really means something, and I think you see that as well in the lineup from a night to night basis. You very rarely see people just resting. Like it just doesn't really happen in the W because they just don't have that luxury. So yeah, I absolutely love it, and just really enjoy the play style. I'm so glad, Albert Wynn, that you could come along for the ride here on Buckets WNBA. Maybe we'll get another cameo at some point during the playoffs. Which reminds me, programming note. So we will be back Tuesday with more best bets. And then, if you can believe it, we are like right up against the playoffs. So we are going to get you a playoff preview by the end of next week. Albert, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and we'll definitely do this again soon.
All right, sounds good. A reminder, if you like what you hear, Please rate and review the podcast. Also, download the award-winning Action app if you haven't yet. Once again, I'm Maria Marino saying, let's get buckets.